All right, it looks like we have a good number of our participants, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, thank you so much for taking some time out today to join Spark Hire and Grayscale's conversation on how to create a frictionless hiring process for the great bounce back. Today's webinar is scheduled for an hour, but I wanted to let everyone know that the webinar will probably be about 30 minutes long, and we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end, so feel free throughout the presentation to leave any questions that you may have in the chat. I'm Alexa Jackson. I'm the product marketing specialist at Spark Hire. I'm so excited to introduce the panelists joining us today. We have Spark Hire's own Jeremy Tolman, who is partnerships manager, and then we have Ty Abernethy, who is co-founder and CEO of Grayscale. Today we're going to talk about how, as we prepare for a return to the new normal, our experience as a virtual workforce has created major and lasting shifts in how we hire. Tech-forward solutions have really paved the way for a more efficient, candidate-centered approach, and to better prepare for the next hiring boom. It's really essential for companies to establish hiring processes that support and embrace that change. So let's dive right in. Let's start with one thing that companies can focus on right now when setting up a hiring process that favors the candidate experience. And Ty, we'll start by hearing from you.
Perfect. Thanks, Alexa. I appreciate it. And thanks for spending some time with us, everybody. So I want to, the question you asked, Alexa, that right now was sort of a component. What can people be doing right now? And I think for many of you tuning in, you're probably in a situation right now where things are starting to really bounce back, and you're feeling probably an acute pain point, at least in some area of your business. Where you're having trouble finding people, you're having trouble keeping them in your process, and probably having a lot of candidate drop off, and are really having trouble sort of meeting the hiring goals for the company. So if you're in that situation, there's sort of the stepping back and what you should do in a general market, and then there's like what can you do right now to help move the needle on that, and so what we see is just like really tactical things, like starting to drill in on identifying the biggest pain points in the process. Like one thing we see a lot is like candidate ghosting, right? Like candidates not showing up for interviews, right? You spend all this time getting them to the interview, and then they flake. And so I think starting to step out and just whiteboard, like what are our key drop-off points? What are our key pain points that we need to be addressing? And then start to map out a loose candidate journey that starts to address some of that, right? Like simple things like, set up interview reminders via text message for upcoming interviews. Like something as basic as that can really help move the needle in a tactical way on a problem that you may be experiencing like right here and now. And so Alexa, back to your question, like, what can be done now? I think it's sort of like, there's like what you should do, and then there's like just what you have bandwidth to do, right? And I think with the bandwidth, it's like, how do we find those like tactical points throughout the process that we can move the needle on? And even moving the needle like a percentage, a percent or two on candidate ghosting could make a huge impact downstream. So I think it's like little things like that you just kind of hone in on and like really look to set a goal around and move the needle on, and even a small way can make a big difference.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and just a quick thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and thanks to Ty for joining us too, and Alexa for helping moderate the webinar. Really appreciated it. And yeah, I think those are really great points, Ty. I like that you brought up too, like once you've actually mapped out what should you be doing to improve this to really favor the candidate experience, kind of cross-check that with what do you actually have the bandwidth to be able to accomplish, so that you can kind of plan really effectively too. When I'm thinking about setting up really favors the candidate experience, I think about making sure that you're keeping candidates informed throughout the process, so they have as much information as possible. They know exactly what to expect. So make sure you're really clear with them from the outset of your process. What are the steps in your hiring process, and what are the general timelines that they should expect you to be getting back to them for each of those steps in the process? And something that a lot of organizations have found really helpful is creating a hiring SLA to help keep your team accountable so that you are following up with candidates in these expected timeframes. SLA is a service level agreement, and a hiring SLA would pretty much just be an internal contract within your organization. It's pretty much just a series of commitments from each team member that's involved in the hiring process. And usually that would encompass things like what are the actual tasks that need to be accomplished at each stage of the process, who's responsible for owning that task, and what is the actual deadline or timeline that those tasks need to be completed by. And I think it's important too that if you're not actually keeping up with those timelines that you committed to candidates on, to give them a quick update, send them a quick email, let them know where you're actually at and when to expect to hear back from you again.
Piggyback off of what you said, I think it's really interesting, the sort of shift. Like I've observed with a lot of our customers that candidate experience is sort of something that we all love to talk about, right? And really strive to make an impact for. But I kind of feel like we've made this shift in this post-COVID landscape we're in, where it's like you can no longer afford to have candidate experience be a nice to have. Like you have to start investing in it, because if you don't, that competitor that does will be able to attract better quality talent. And it's kind of just every touch point with your brand, most critically your hiring process. And like to your point, the SLAs that you make, like just giving visibility, transparency, it's like that kind of stuff that like really does matter. And so when you drill into, like back when I mentioned before, like on candidate ghosting, like sometimes the root of that is something as simple as like not giving visibility or transparency in the process, or another company doing a better job of being more transparent and creating a better experience with candidates. So I think it's so important while we're looking for tactical things to do. And I think this webinar is in part like, what are some tactical things we can do while we're all spread super thin? Like at the same time, you really can't put candidate experience on the back burner as a nice to have anymore. That shift is in this kind of candidate driven market, it's absolutely essential. So I think it's a great point you made, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Ty.
Perfect. That was really great. Thank you. So now, how have you seen talent acquisition teams successfully remain engaged or re-engage with candidates following a hiring freeze or abrupt halt in the hiring process? And Jeremy, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think this is a timely question because a lot of organizations kind of maybe slowed down with their hiring or had to entirely put their hiring on pause at some point in the last 14 or so months. And so there's a huge shift with this great bounce back that we're talking about. So something that I'm a huge proponent of is using videos in your emails. So think about recording videos highlighting each of the roles that you're recruiting for. Talk about the unique selling points of your organization and what's so great about the job. And I think these videos can really be most effective when the person recording the video is a manager or an employee that the candidate would actually be working with. I think those messages really resonate well with candidates when you have that person recording those videos. And not only can you send these videos and emails to your candidates throughout these different touch points, or maybe in an email on LinkedIn, but actually use social media. So share these videos on LinkedIn, ask your network to share the videos, ask them to tag candidates who might be interested, or maybe they know someone for the role. Make sure you're using LinkedIn with these videos too.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I think the use of video, I think, is one of the most it's one of the most underutilized channels in my mind, and the greatest opportunity for kind of helping your candidate experience sort of stand out, right? Like we ingest information on this device all day, and most of it's video in nature, right? And so there's no better way to tell a story than through video. I'll just piggyback off of what you said, Jeremy, just on like with re-engaging candidates and needing to, again, in some cases, very quickly re-engage a very large pool of candidates as things go from 0 recs to 100 recs, right? Or whatever your specific case may be. We're also seeing leveraging channels in addition to video, but also SMS as a great way to sort of cut through the noise to re-engage, whether it be old silver medalist candidates in your database, or, candidates that have, applied back when, you had to, go on that hiring freeze, whatever it may be. But just simple, like, whether it be, filtering based on tags in your ATS, or going back to recs that have closed and re-engaging those candidates through SMS, that will really help. Just a basic thing is just sending a text to those candidates, just with a simple, hey, I know it's been a little while since we talked. Wanted to see if you might be interested in exploring opportunities with us. We just had a sales manager open up. Thought you'd be a great fit for it. Any interest in chatting, right? Like something as simple as that can re-engage a conversation, which can really help kind of take a lot of that maybe a bit stale data, and refresh it, and help you to start to see sort of what sort of gems you might have in the database that might be ready and willing to for an opening you have or are going to be having in the coming months. So yeah, and then bonus points if you're sending video content through SMS as well, which is, I think, just again, engaging candidates across channels. Email, video, text, voice, you name it. Like, the more touch points on different channels, the better. So kind of thinking in terms of like, how do I start to tell a story across different channels? One, just to help punch the noise, but two, like, you'll tell a richer story when you're taking more of an omni-channel approach. And so anyway, but thanks again, Jeremy. I think your points were spot on video.
To be leveraging as many channels as you can, because some candidates are going to be more of a text person. Some people are more about checking their email every day, and they're really responsive with emails. Some people are all over their LinkedIn messages. So I think it's really good to make sure that you are hitting every channel, hitting every angle, so that you are cutting through the noise, like Ty was saying.
Awesome. Now, what are some ways that you can add structure to the interview process to help reduce unconscious bias and to make overall better hiring decisions? And Ty, we'll start with you.
Structured interviews are, the best way to eliminate unconscious bias, right? I think, all of us, have our own set of biases for, and they're typically unconscious ones, right? And I think having that structure in place to lean on, I think is the most powerful way to combat that. I think, being able to also, in some cases, have the infrastructure in place to throw a little bit wider net out to candidates you maybe have previously been on the fence about. If you have the right process in place that allows you to sort of filter down quickly to a subset of candidates, it then allows you to throw a wider net out. And even some of those unconscious biases that kind of play out in the resume review phase, that can allow you to, one, kind of open it up to a broader pool of candidates, and two, to sort of continue to sort of eliminate some of those unconscious biases that are, that are at play. And so I think that can be a good way to combat it. But Jeremy, I'd love to hear your perspective. You're a bit more of the interview guru than me, and I want to hear, like, what have you seen working well for your clients with SparkHire?
Yeah, I mean, just adding more structure is key, and always expanding your talent pool, like you were saying, as broadly as you're able to. So always looking for ways to really be able to maximize that and expand your talent pool is really key also. Obviously, SparkHire has a lot of experience helping companies adopt video interviewing. And one of the most popular things that we're seeing is using one-way video interviews. And what's really great about those is they can actually add a lot of structure to your process, because when a candidate does a one-way video interview, all of the candidates for a particular role, they're answering the same set of questions under the same circumstances. And it's helping make that more fair for them, because it's empowering hiring stakeholders to easily compare candidates side by side on an even playing field. Plus, these interview recordings could be shared with anyone that's going to be involved in the hiring process. So you're getting a wider group of opinions and putting together like a diverse group of a panel to review these candidates too. So that's another really great way to help combat bias by getting feedback from multiple sources early on in the process like this, instead of just a single recruiter making a decision on who's going to make it past those early stage interviews. Something else that I think that goes a long way as far as structured interviewing is making sure that you're working together with the other hiring managers or any other hiring stakeholders to agree on how are you actually assessing and rating candidates so that everyone is following the same system. You want to make sure it's as objective as possible, that it is being leveraged consistently for all of the candidates. And that's going to make it a lot easier for your interviewers, but it's also just going to help with their evaluation process and make sure it's as fair as possible and that you do end up moving forward with the very best candidates. A couple of common ways to assess or rate candidates' interviews would be either a simple 5-star rating system where you pretty much determine what's a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star answer to your interview questions. What do those sound like? And then the different members of your panel, your team that's assessing the candidate's interview, could rate the responses on that 5-star scale. And the combined average rating would be the candidate's score. And as a team, you want to decide what is the benchmark rating that you want candidates to be above. Maybe you say you're only going to advance candidates that are a 3-star and higher. The other popular method for scoring candidates would be to have a more detailed scorecard. And that'd be a more detailed way to help match candidates with job-specific competencies. So that might include things like notes, highlighting, or maybe elaborating on candidates' responses to different interview questions, potential areas or reasons for concern, and then ultimately a pass-fail recommendation. But yeah, it's super important to make sure you agree on what is the actual criteria and how you're assessing candidates and figuring out how do you make that as objective as possible and getting the diverse group of opinions from different hiring stakeholders.
When you're thinking about virtual interviews in particular, do you have any tips on making sure that they're just as structured and engaging as they would be in person?
Sure. I think something that I brought up earlier just about things that favor the candidate experience, providing your candidates with as much context or information about the interview ahead of time. If you're doing like a live video interview with candidates where you're just meeting virtually, make sure they're aware of how much time they should set aside for the interview, who they're actually going to be interviewing with, if they should have anything prepared for that interview. Make sure prior to the interview, you're actually agreeing on the questions that each team member is going to ask and that you have determined what is that objective or consistent way that you're going to assess these candidates' interviews. And then something that I can't stress enough is the importance of using a dedicated video interview platform. There's a lot of different really effective tools for hosting meetings, and they work really well for internal meetings, but I think there's a ton of benefits and a huge case to be made for having a dedicated video interview platform, because that's going to help make sure that you're providing a more cohesive experience for both your candidates and the rest of your interviewers and members of your hiring team. Because if you have a dedicated video interviewing platform, you could provide a branded experience for candidates where you could have things like your logo and your colors and videos that you've put together, or pictures from team members, and more information about your organization. And a candidate's going to be able to see all that branding information before they start a video interview with you. And it's going to be tailored to your organization, what your brand is like, and what your hiring process is like. You're also going to be able to have all of your interview recordings saved in a centralized location. They could be organized by job. They can be accompanied with other candidate information like a resume that you can review at the same time. And I think it's really important to be able to gather feedback around these recordings from anyone that's going to be involved with making a decision about the candidate. So having that centralized place where you can review recordings and leave feedbacks like ratings, comments, scoring candidates, and things like that will be really helpful to kind of uphold that structure and making the experience really engaging for candidates too.
Jeremy, because I think it's in thinking in terms of leveraging technology to help with some of these things, right? I think like one thing that I've observed is that COVID has really been an accelerator for adopting new technology just out of necessity, right? And I think some of the things you're mentioning, like having a dedicated platform for video interviewing, starting to set like having a system you're using for structuring your interview process, whether it be in your ATS or a video interviewing platform, like get structure around it. And like, this is technology that is, I think especially as you're moving fast from a hiring standpoint, like that is foundational, that really needs to be put in place to make sure that you're able to effectively scale this process, right? And so I think like Yeah, I think, to your point, it's critical to get some of this tech in place. And I also think, like, thinking in terms of like things like the first point we made around like widening the pool, right? Like going back to the on-demand interviews you mentioned, right? Like we're seeing, and we've got a number of mutual customers across Grayscale and Spark Hire. We're seeing just by like making, communicating, upfront what the process is going to look like, and then creating like an automated but really frictionless, personalized process can really sort of help you throw a much wider net out. And if you start to have structure and the right tech in place, you can really drive candidates through your process a lot faster, with a lot less bias in your process. And so I know, Alexa, I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself because I know some questions here on, we'll be digging in on personalization and things of that nature. But so I'll pause and then regroup. But I think this is like super, important stuff.
Question is on kind of personalization, and I'll start with you, Ty, of hearing if you have any tips for personalizing communication with applicants throughout the hiring process.
Yeah, well, I think just the forces at play in recruiting, especially if you do any recruiting in volume, the forces at play are sort of designed to sort of personalize, dehumanize everything about the process, right? And I think when things get crazy, the natural inclination is to throw up walls, to get sort of to cut corners from a screening standpoint, to like things start to break down, right? And I think so thinking in terms of like, how do you personalize communication? Really, personalization, I think, whether you're doing, one-to-one communication manually with another human, or you're leveraging automation to help with that, like personalization really is like at that's not a nice to have kind of thing, right? Like personalization is kind of what a lot of this hinges on, right? Because it helps with fostering relationship, building rapport. And so I'll just give like some specific examples in the world of Grayscale. So our customers will leverage our platform, which is a fully SMS first, platform, to start to automate the candidate journey end to end, so that all the recruiter has to do is maybe change a stage in the process to advance the candidate, or to trigger the on-demand interview via Spark Hire, things like that. But you can leverage things like automation and still create a very personalized experience, right? Pull in all sorts of different contextual details from the ATS into those automated text messages, and still always have that communication channel for the candidate to reply back, to get a recruiter, and to keep the conversation going. So automation, in my mind, is a great way to personalize things, because you as a single recruiter can't be doing all things for all candidates, right? I imagine right now you're having to, surgically spend your time across only the most value add candidates across a lot of them. But automation allows you to scale that high touch communication. If you had infinite amount of time, you could do it manually, but starting to kind of leverage automation in that way with, in a personalized approach, can really help sort of drive the process forward faster and keep candidates engaged. Because again, even with automation, you can build a really personalized experience and build rapport with candidates, because everything's coming from you anyway. It's just coming from you in an automated way versus you manually sending everything out time after time, right? So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. But I think again, it's really important. Like so much of this hinges on keeping the personalization, keeping that human to human, like throughout the process, regardless of what tech you're leveraging.
Awesome, Ty. And Jeremy, do you want to build on that as well?
Challenging sometimes to strike the right balance between automation and personalization. But that's exactly what you want to be able to do, because that's how you're going to be able to cast that wide net that we talked about, but provide a really engaging experience where you are advancing the very best candidates to the end of your process, and locking in the very best candidates. So really striking that balance is important. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You just need to be really thoughtful about how you're crafting your automated messages, making sure that you're triggering them at the right time. So by delivering those right messages at the right time, you're going to end up having what feels like a really personalized experience for candidates, even if it is an automated message. And I think you want to kind of like map out the different roles that you're hiring for and map out the different stages of your process and help determine like does it make most sense to use more automation? When does it make sense to slow it down at different stages of the process or for different positions to really hyper personalize your messaging? And having a really clear understanding that I think could go a long way. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm a huge proponent in using video and emails, and I think that's a really great way to personalize your touch points with candidates. So as a couple of examples, let's say a candidate applies for one of your roles, you determine that you want to advance into the next step of your process. I recommend sending them an email to congratulate them on making it to the next step of the process, explain what to expect for the next steps as part of the process, but in that email, include a video relaying that message too. I think that's a really great way to stand out. And if you have the time that you can afford creating a video for all these candidates that are advancing at that stage of the process, that's amazing. But you might even just create what I would call a one-to-many video, where it's not necessarily specific to that candidate, but you're delivering the message in a way where it still feels like it is, but it's the same video that you could use for all the candidates that make it to that stage of the process. Another example would be maybe when a candidate's invited to a final stage interview, when you're going to send them an email to invite them and let them know they've made it to that step of the process, you want to coordinate a good time for a later stage interview. Include a video that's pretty much like an employee testimonial. Have one of your employees that really advocate for your culture, that really love working at your organization, record a video talking about how much they love it, because I think that's going to keep a candidate locked in and really excited about this opportunity. And they're going to be really quick to schedule that interview with you and be pushing for next steps to try to land this role with you guys. Another interesting example might be when you're ready to send an official offer letter and an email to a candidate, also include a video in that email that really reiterates why you think the candidate's going to be a great fit, how excited you are for them to join your team and be the next member of your organization. So I think things like that can go a long way. If it's that late in the process too, where there's maybe not as many candidates that you're creating a video like that for, maybe you even want to hyper personalize that video. But I think you could find ways where you can create one-to-many videos in all these different situations where you could use the same video for all the candidates that make it to that stage of your process for that role.
Perfect. And final question before we jump into Q&A. What are some ways that talent acquisition teams can convey the employee value proposition throughout the remote interviewing process? And Jeremy, we'll start with you.
Really be conveying your EVP throughout the remote interviewing process. I think there's a lot of challenges when your process is more remote or more virtual, where you might not be necessarily meeting on site at the office to give a candidate a tour of the office, maybe have them meet some other team members and really see these types of things in the flesh, so to speak. So I think a lot of that could be missed out on when things are more virtual or remote too. Some things that I think are important to include are pictures. So I think it's important for candidates to see pictures of different team members of the team that they would be joining. So maybe you could include things like this in the career section of your website. Maybe you're linking to an Instagram page that has fun pictures of different team members, or if you're using video interviews, this could be part of the candidate experience for your video interviewing too. I think articles on external websites can go a long way because they're positioned from a third party. So examples of that that I've seen that have been really effective are articles on a website called Built In. You might also just have thought leadership pieces from your leaders that you're sharing with candidates or highlighting at different points in your process. Super important to double check your reviews on Glassdoor. That's usually one of the first places that candidates are doing research about employers. So really make sure you're double checking how you're representing yourself on Glassdoor so you put your best foot forward. Something that I think is underrated that I didn't really realize at first, but when I was interviewing candidates, I realized that customer reviews actually stand out to candidates a lot, because in interviews, candidates would talk about how they're really excited to work at SparkHire after they saw some really awesome reviews from customers. So think about how you're keeping customer reviews top of mind for your candidates too, or just giving them an opportunity to explore information like that too. And another thing that I guess I've mentioned a couple of times now too is use videos. Send videos to candidates at different points in your hiring process to help keep them engaged. Want them to see things like employee testimonials, where you have an employee record a video talking about how much they love to work at the organization or what they like about that role that you're recruiting the candidate for. Use these videos on social media like LinkedIn, send the candidates in emails at different stages of your process, and I think that would go a really long way too. But I think those are a few ways that you can continue to communicate that throughout your process.
Awesome. Ty, anything to add?
Yeah. No, just piggyback on what you said, Jeremy. I think, I'll give a very like tactical example. So we have a customer in the healthcare space, specifically in the ABA, the autism services sector, and they're hiring for ABA therapists among many other roles. And for them, we were talking, and a big challenge that they're facing is, it's a tough role, right? And it's oftentimes it's a role that they have trouble filling for. The pay isn't, it's a very, they're competing with a lot of different, candidates that could fill a lot of different types of roles. Pay isn't as great. It's really something someone has to be passionate about doing, right? And for an ABA therapist, oftentimes, really potential candidates don't really know kind of what the day-to-day may look like. And so they're building out video content to really help, as soon as someone applies, boom, they get a text with a video that gives them sort of a day in the life of an ABA therapist, right? Like really clear on like, here's what it is. Like, this is kind of missional work, right? This is stuff that like you have to be passionate about. And if it's something that like, a candidate's not jazzed up about, like they'll self-select out of the process, right? And that's good for them, right? But then the ones that engage and opt to move to the next step, like it allows for like that like visual, like, oh, I kind of get a sense for what this role is going to look like, and I'm interested in leaning in, and so that can be really powerful and just sort of giving clarity around the role and what the position will entail, I think. And so again, back to like building rapport with candidates and starting to tell a story that the candidates want to lean into, I think is really, really important. And so I think video is the best channel to do that. And so thinking in terms of like, all right, how do I start to, if I step back, how do I start to tell the right story and build rapport with my candidate throughout the process? I've seen, again, back to taking an omni-channel approach, I think that is critical. And so a lot of our customers, obviously, we're in the SMS space. And so what we see working really well is a combination of video layered in with SMS combined. So as a candidate, you're advancing candidates, even for high volume roles. Like some folks on the call might be doing like high volume hiring for call center, warehouse hiring, name it. Like we have customers that really automate every touch point of the process, but drop videos in the right place, right? Drop an on-demand interview in the right place, right? And then Grayscale is sort of that backbone to power that consistent candidate experience, because you're looking to like, how do I eliminate friction in the process while still building rapport, having a highly, high touch personalized experience. And so that's a shift we see a lot of companies making, is from like going from a place where maybe there's one or two team members that they're like, we need more recruiters that are recruiting like Sarah or recruiting like Bill, they just get it. But Bill and Sarah are like spread so thin, and they're just like so detailed that they're making sure they get every touch point to every candidate and follow up and do all this. And you're like, how do you scale that? But starting to leverage, and they're also spending time on the phone, you can't always scale that. And so what are some things you can do to start to recreate that? And we see like the combination of automation that's SMS driven plus video, right? It can really start to create those moments in a really like highly scalable way. And I think that's why, we have a number of mutual customers with Spark Hire here, is because of that. Like there's some really good mojo when you start working across different channels, right? And start incorporating them together and blend them into one sort of holistic process. So anyway, so we see that working really well. But Alexa, back to you.
Well, perfect. And I think this seems like a good stopping point to just make sure that we have time to answer questions from our participants. So thank you all for your time today. And if you have questions, please type those into the chat and we can answer them for you now. And I'll give everyone a minute to send in their questions.
Thanks, Alexa, for helping moderate, and thanks everyone for joining today. Yeah, go ahead and submit some questions in the chat so we could address some of your questions live, and we could always get in touch with you offline afterwards too. In a moment, we'll run a poll that will come up on your screen also, where you can indicate if you want more information about SparkHire or Grayscale so that we can get in touch with you to have a conversation offline too. Yeah, someone asked about seeing a demo of SparkHire within Greenhouse. So yeah, in a moment, definitely engage with the poll so that we can get you that information because we do have an integration with Greenhouse that we'd love to be able to show you. Good question. Let's see what other questions we have. So someone asked about sending videos in a text message, something that we brought up throughout the webinar today. They were asking if SparkHire and Calendly are integrated to allow that. So I think Calendly is a scheduling tool. SparkHire does provide a similar scheduling tool that's built in also, but you don't necessarily have to be using SparkHire to be sending a link to Calendly. Okay, I think the question was actually positioned for Grayscale. So they're asking if you could send this out through SparkHire. Not necessarily. So if you were sending out these text messages, I believe you would be leveraging Grayscale for something like that. Right, Ty?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so Grayscale, and I don't know if this is the same viewer that was asking about Greenhouse integration, but like whatever it may be, Grayscale integrates with your ATS, makes it pretty seamless to start to kind of sync up that communication. So your team just has to change, the stage in their process to trigger a text message with a Calendly link, like you mentioned, or an on-demand interview, or or whatnot. So yeah, so Grayscale is kind of that backbone that you can kind of map out the candidate journey. All via SMS. You can also manually text through Grayscale in a system like Greenhouse or other ATSs. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. So long-winded way of saying yes, you can use Grayscale that way.
Yeah, something that made me think of too that might be a really good use case for this. SparkHire provides something called video messaging, where you can create these different types of videos that I talked about, including in an email or text messages. You could have them stored in a place on SparkHire. You can generate a link to them. You could even record them through SparkHire if you wanted to also, or just upload them as well. But using the video messaging, you could include those in text that you're sending out through Grayscale and have that automated at the right stages of the process that you want candidates to get a text message with certain videos. So there's definitely a lot of really cool applications for using the two tools together like that.
Love that. Yes, do that. That's great. I didn't realize y'all had that module. That is great. I think any way to get to like easily spin up video content to then be able to drop in communication, right? And then you can just grab that link, to Jeremy's point, drop it in a template that you use. And if it's kind of a one-to-many video, you can drop it in a single template and use it over and over again on stage 2, phone screen, or stage 2 resume review. And then to Jeremy's point, later stage in the process, right? Then you can create like a custom video for like that one candidate and send it out, right? Because that's when you want to get more surgical, like late stage. We're moving to background tech. We're moving to these later stages. Let's get more, more tailored in on you, Jeremy, the candidate, right? So yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, do that. What Jeremy said,
Yeah.
the video moves the needle. Yeah.
No, these are great ideas, and we'd love to connect with you guys after the webinar to talk through that more with you too. Someone also asked if SparkHire helps with the content creation for these types of videos. How is the video produced? SparkHire doesn't necessarily help with the content creation. If you wanted to use the video recorder on SparkHire, you could just record the video like right from your web camera or your phone like that too. That might be a way, or maybe you've already just recorded the video from another device and you just upload it to SparkHire that way too. My 2 cents is that for a lot of these types of videos that we're talking about, I don't think they necessarily need to be overproduced. It could even just be you propping your cell phone up in the right way and talking straight into your cell phone. But I don't think these videos need to be overproduced. I think the more authentic or genuine they are, the more that they end up resonating with candidates. And I think that's what's really going to stand out to them, is that they don't necessarily need to be very overproduced, very high production quality videos too. Yeah, here, let's trigger this poll now. There might be some more questions that you can submit through the Q&A, but there should be a poll that's going to come up on your screen in a moment where you can indicate if you want to get more information from Spark Hire, Grayscale, both, neither. But go ahead, engage with the poll so that we know to get you guys some more information if you're interested. And if you have more questions, we can get in touch with you after the webinar too and address them that way as well. But yeah, thanks again, everyone. You should see the poll up on the screen. So go ahead and engage at the poll. But huge thank you again, everyone, for joining today, or thank you to anyone who's reviewing the recording too.
And for those of you that are that want to stay on, have any questions, we're happy to, again, field QA, drop your response into that poll, and then we'll just keep cranking on some QA if anyone wants to stick around and have some questions for either Jeremy or myself.
Yeah, we'll give you another second to engage at the poll there. Okay, it's probably good for the poll. I think you guys probably had enough time to answer that. If not, go ahead and still jump into that. And yeah, here, we'll give you another moment here. If you do have more questions, you could submit them in the chat and we could adjust them live. If you think of something later too, we could always follow up with you and get you some more information, send you the recording, and you could ask us any questions that way too. Give you another second here. Okay, maybe that's a good point to wrap it up. But thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for engaging with us in the poll and the chat like that. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Alexa, for joining today too. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Tuning in, yeah. And if any questions come up after the fact, please email the team. We're happy to field questions either on the Grayscale side or the Spark Hire side. But thanks again.